Hey, I'm glad you're here. Let's get into this one. My name is Matt, but I practice my art of mixing and mastering as VividPhase, and I'm excited to get started working on your project with you. In this video, we'll run through the best process for getting your session cleaned up, tracks named, session exported, quality checked, zipped up, and uploaded for me to get working on. Let's start with the mastering service first. And let's just double check how you're exporting your mix for me to master. In this example of an exported song shown in Audacity, we can see it's already slammed at or past 0 dBFS. You might be using a true peak limiter or clipping and the file is right up against 0 dB full scale, or it might have transient peaks and information passing 0 dB that we can't see, and in this case would be unrecoverable, if not a 32-bit floating point file. Unfortunately, if that's from a clipper or a true peak limiter or truncated from a 24-bit or 16-bit export, then we can't simply gain that down either and get that dynamic information back. As we see here, if we try to pull this down by like 6 dB, which is what a lot of people talk about when sending their files for mixing and mastering, while the overall volume is lower, we haven't gained back those lost dynamic peaks or the transients. So you want to most often remove true peak limiting and mix bus clipping and export your song on 32-bit floating point, which will give you the most flexibility to work with it in mastering. If you do that, then even though this example looks like it's still touching or passing 0 dB, I can clip gain that down and regain that headroom and those dynamics, since the information isn't lost when it's a 32-bit floating point file, and I'm not working with output that's been clipped or true peak limited. And we can see that here in this example. If you can't export a 32-bit floating point file for some reason, then do ensure that you've lowered your level of your mix a bit so information isn't crossing 0 dB, and be sure to dither your export appropriately. Finally, if your mix completely falls apart when removing your limiter, then let's talk further. We can certainly figure out some options to work with what you have, depending on your goals and your expectations. Alright, with a good level set for your song, let's hop back into our mix session. We'll note a few items here for a text file that we'll make in a moment. First, note the BPM. Maybe also note the key that your song is in. Also the general length for your song. You might even want to take this opportunity to pull in some start or end markers. Make sure that those are set appropriately if your DAW uses those for the export. We'll go ahead and we'll hop into the export or bounce settings. I'll include at the end some examples from other DAWs as well, so you have those screens to reference for the actual settings, but let's talk about those briefly here. On your export screen, ensure that you're exporting a PCM WAV file and not an MP3. That your start and ending time markers look correct. That you're not doing any auto leveling or normalizing of your audio export. That the bit depth is ideally 32-bit floating point, and if not, that you're also using dithering. And then that the sample rate, that should stay at whatever you've been using throughout your project, and I'll set up my session to match. I'll be dithering at the final stage right before the master goes out. Otherwise, that's about it. You can go ahead and you can click OK and you can bounce this project out. We'll move on to the final step here. Alright, go ahead and hop out to the folder or directory where you saved your export, and let's create a text file with some information about this song. I'll be using that during the mastering process. Go ahead and note your artist name or your band name. Also the song name, that's important for me. The song BPM that we just grabbed from the session. Also the key of the song. The song length, so that I know that I'm working with the full file and it hasn't been truncated during our process here. The sample rate and the bit depth, we just saw that on the bounce or the export screen. And finally, any notes that you have for me about maybe how you want me to work the mastering, maybe what you want me to focus on in particular. And that's about it for this step. And then let's go ahead and get that zipped up. Alright, go ahead and give your mix a final listen, make sure that's sounding good. Make sure our info text file is here in the same directory. Then we'll go ahead and zip this up. On a Mac, it actually comes with a compress option built in. You can just hit compress here and it'll turn it into a zip file for us. Make sure that the file is named again with your artist name and the song name. It's helpful for me to keep things organized. If you're on Windows, I would suggest the 7-zip program. It's free. Again, that's the number 7 and the word zip. Just when you're using that program, make sure the export type is a .zip file. It does also have a 7z type, but that's more difficult for me to handle. If you can just make it a zip file, that'll be perfect. Go ahead and upload that and we'll get started on your project. If you're sending your project in for mixing, then there's more work for us to do on this service. First, go ahead and note the BPM of your song. You'll also want to take note of the key that your song is in. We'll want to figure out how long our song is and make note of that as well. 3 minutes 50 here. You might even on your DAW pull in the project markers if your DAW uses that on export. That can be helpful. And then let's go ahead and save a new copy of your project, one that you're going to send to mixing. And that way we'll still have your original project as backup files in case anything goes wrong with the cleanup process we're going to do here. Do make sure that you name it, your song name or your artist name, something that's identifiable, and maybe that you're sending this to mixing. Let's go back into your project, and we'll want to remove any empty tracks that might still be in there. Also any muted tracks that you're not going to be using in your production. Let's go ahead and get those out so they're not part of the export. That could get confusing for me as I pull in your files. Okay. And then look at the track names that you have. They should mean something to somebody like me who hasn't been working on this project for the last several weeks. That'll make it a lot easier for me when I pull in the files. I'll know where they're organized, what they belong to. So for example here, G1, that could be renamed to Guitar 1, Guitar 1 Center, since it has no panning. Looks like in this case we're doing some LCRs, so the second one could be Guitar 2 Left. And you can go through and rename all your tracks. Once you're done with renaming your tracks, most of the DAWs will have like a shortcut option. Logic here, if you highlight the actual track regions, I think it's Shift Option N, like name, and there you go. It'll pull in the actual names from the tracks themselves. So it's a way to shortcut some of the process. You can look at your DAW and see what that looks like. Go ahead and look over the other tracks here to get some examples of what those names might be to be useful to somebody else who hasn't been working on your project. At this point, let's go ahead and do a rough mix of your project how you have it right now. When you do your export or your bounce, make sure that the start and the end points are correct, that you're not doing any kind of normalization, you're exporting a wave, not an MP3, and that your bit depth and your sample rate are correct for the project, basically what you've been using thus far. And go ahead and bounce that out. Now review your tracks and your buses and decide what plugins you want to keep and how many tracks or buses you're going to include in the export. For example, maybe you're doing just a 4-stem like this, the drums, bass, vocal, guitar. That could be a 4-stem mix, and you could bounce out just those compiled stems or groups. That gives the mixer less definition, less flexibility in how they mix the individual tracks. So ideally you'd be able to export the individual tracks rather than just groups or stems and get more for your service out of a mixing project. Once you made that decision, go ahead and go into your DAW, and you may have a different type of an export or bounce screen specific to the actual tracks that you're going to bounce. Like Logic here has its own screen. I may show some screenshots from other DAWs as well, just to give you an idea of what that could look like for your actual track export. Again, some of them are a bit different. And I'll look that up and see what I can pull together for a few other DAW examples. In this case for Logic, this is the screen here that shows probably the ideal settings for most folks. Hopefully, if you did have a sound, so typically we're going to want to bypass all your effect plugins, but if you did have a sound or something that was critical to the actual track that you're trying to export, you might want to go ahead and bake that in first. Bake it into the audio file. And then when you do this option, you can just bypass all the effects plugins. Couple of things I'd like to note here. Go ahead and spot check your audio files, your exported audio, specifically the kick and the snare, maybe some other elements if they're particularly loud or particularly dynamic. If they look like this screen here with the example of not enough headroom, and you can see that the waveform is touching or exceeding 0 dB, that means we're probably losing some information. What you'll want to do is go ahead and go back into your project for those specific tracks and lower their gain, lower their volume, and then export those again so that we're not seeing this cut here. Also, a question that comes up is, what about bass or guitars that have a DI or a direct interface? Do you want the process sound or do you want the direct? I would suggest both. Go ahead and do an export of both the direct interface or the DI and also of whatever effects that you've put on those. Sometimes I'll have better plugins or better options for processing that sound than what you might have in your production, or yours might be better, and we'll just run with that. So go ahead and do both in that case. All right, it's a good practice to go ahead and do one last check here. Let's go ahead and open up a new blank project in your DAW. Set your BPM to the BPM of your actual song. And what we're going to do here is we'll pull over the files that we've exported, the actual tracks. And we'll just select all of those. We're going to drag those into the DAW session here and just do a spot check, make sure it all makes sense. We pull that in. We can create new tracks from those. We don't need to worry about the smart tempo since we've set that. And this looks good. Sometimes the tracks won't be aligned to startup point 1 with the way that we exported this. It is. It's all start at the same time, so they should be aligned, but that's what we're going to check now. Go ahead and we'll play through these files. Okay, we've got some audio playing here. You won't hear it in the video, but the audio is playing through, and then I'll spot check different sections of the song. Make sure that it's all playing in time, the different tracks are making sense and they're all aligned where they should be. Don't worry too much if you have overs here on your master or your mix bus, that's fine, there's no limiting in place. We'll also notice here that these tracks have extended quite far beyond the normal tail or the normal end. That's fine, I wouldn't worry about that. I can go ahead and trim that back in. We must have had a project marker set too far when we did our export, but it's, again, no issue at all. I can trim that up on the mixing and mastering process on my end. All right, we're almost there. Let's go back to our directory here. You can see I've already made that text file for us, the info text. So you want to make a text file and include this information, you know, your artist name or band name, the name of the song that you're going to send me, the BPM that we noted earlier, the song key that you have, the song length, and then the sample rate and the bit depth that you've chosen. Again, that should align with whatever you've been using throughout the production. Then finally, any notes that you might have for me during the mixing process that we can use as a reference, and we can talk more about that as we discuss your project. But that'll be helpful information to include. Finally, once you've saved that file, we've got all our tracks. The last step to do here is to actually go ahead and zip those up. Easiest way to do that is to take that entire folder on Mac We actually have a compress option here, and it'll make a zip file for us. That'll take just a minute to do, but that'll get it zipped up. On Windows, there's a free program called 7-Zip, the number 7 and the word zip. That's a pretty good program. Just make sure when you're using that one, and again, it's free if I didn't mention that. Just make sure that when you're using that one that you use the .zip export type. It does also have a 7Z type, and that's a little bit more difficult to work with, so just make sure it's a zip file. And that's it. Go ahead and send that zip file up to me. I'm excited to get started working on your project. Let's make your art vivid.